Have you ever thought about how much language really, like, shapes our world?
Oh, yeah,
It's pretty incredible.
it is.
So today, we're going to dive into a story that really, like, shows that power in action. And it's the story of how China transformed its writing system, which is incredibly complex, by the way,
Oh, yeah.
to become a global superpower.
Right.
We're talking about a language with tens of thousands of characters,
Yeah.
not just like the 26 letters that we have in English.
It's a totally different ball game.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating journey of innovation and adaptation, and some really remarkable people were a part of this story.
Wow.
And it all begins with a really tough time in China's history. It's called the Century of Humiliation.
The Century of Humiliation.
Yeah.
So let's set the stage here. What exactly happened during this time? And how did it lead to such a big push for language reform?
Okay, so picture this. A nation with, thousands of years of this really proud history, and all of a sudden, it's forced to its knees. That's basically what happened to China in the mid-1800s. The Opium Wars were a series of conflicts with, Western powers, especially Britain, and they had a devastating impact.
I remember learning about the Opium Wars in school, but to be honest, the details are kind of fuzzy now. Can you, like, give us a little refresher?
Sure. So basically, Britain was making a ton of money by selling opium to China, even though the Chinese government was trying to, ban this really addictive drug. When China tried to resist, Britain's military, which was, stronger, totally won. And they made China open up its ports to trade, and they basically, carved up the country economically and really undermined its sovereignty.
So not only was China, like, facing this social crisis with opium addiction, but their whole identity as a powerful nation was shattered.
Yeah, exactly. And, after this humiliation, Chinese intellectuals and reformers, they started looking for answers. They started looking for ways to kind of fix things. And they realized one of the main things holding China back was its really low literacy rate.
Hmm.
Less than a third of men could read.
Wow.
And even worse for women, only 2%.
That's a huge disadvantage, especially when you think about all the progress that was happening in the West at the time.
Totally. And reformers saw education as this crucial thing for China to revive itself.
Right.
But the Chinese writing system was just so complex, it was a major obstacle.
Yeah.
This is where we see the link between language and national strength. They thought if they could simplify and unify the language, it would empower people and help China enter the modern world.
So in this whole situation of crisis and kind of searching for a new path, we meet our first big player, a guy named Wang Zhao.
Yes.
So tell us about him.
Wang Zhao, he was a really interesting person, a total traditionalist, but also a visionary reformer.
Okay.
He was born right when the Opium Wars were ending, so he grew up seeing all the chaos and decline of his country.
That's like being thrown into the fire.
Yeah, pretty much. And Wang Zhao, he was convinced that a unified language was super important for China's future. He saw how all the different dialects made it hard for people to understand each other, and it just blocked communication.
Right.
He wanted to make Mandarin, which was his own dialect, the national standard.
Okay.
And to do that, he knew he had to make it easier to learn.
And that meant dealing with the huge complexity of all those Chinese characters, right?
Exactly. Wang Zhao was a radical thinker for his time.
Wow.
He proposed a phonetic system that was based on the strokes that make up each character.
Okay.
Think about trying to learn English if every word was just a random symbol.
Oh, wow.
No clues about how to say it.
Yeah.
That was the problem people had with Chinese.
That sounds like a gigantic task. Almost impossible.
Yeah, it really was. And Wang Zhao faced a lot of opposition.
I bet.
The Empress Dowager Cixi, who was basically the ruler of China back then, she was super conservative.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't into any kind of reform.
Oh.
She shut down Wang Zhao's movement, and he and other reformers, they were forced to leave the country.
So what did he do? Did he just give up on his idea?
No, not at all. Wang Zhao escaped to Japan, which was becoming really modern at the time.
Yeah.
He spent years there learning, refining his ideas, and figuring out how he could get back to China. And this is where the story gets really interesting. He disguised himself as a Buddhist monk and snuck back into the country with his revolutionary plan literally sewn into his clothes.
Wow, that's dedication. He was risking his life for this idea of a unified Chinese language.
Yeah, he really was.
Wow.
And for him, it wasn't just some theory. He traveled all over China, often just walking, sleeping out in the open, meeting everyday people who couldn't read.
Wow.
This experience just confirmed for him that language reform was absolutely essential for China to progress.
So he was not only like the brilliant linguist, but also someone who really understood the struggles of ordinary people.
Exactly. And eventually, all his hard work paid off. Even though some people tried to steal his work, his phonetic system started to gain some traction. Eventually, it was used in schools. By 1906, it was basically the basis for what we know now as modern Mandarin Chinese.
It's an amazing story of how one person's vision and determination can make such a big impact.
Yeah, it really is.
But the story of Chinese language reform doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't. So while Wang Zhao was busy making the language easier to learn, there was another person tackling a different problem: how to organize this huge mass of characters for the modern world.
Okay.
His name was Dudingo,
Dudingo, all right.
and his story is just as fascinating.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell us more about this Dudingo and what challenges he was up against.
Dudingo, he was this passionate librarian. He really believed in the power of books and knowledge,
Okay.
and he saw language as the key to preserving and sharing culture. And his dedication to that idea was really put to the test during one of the worst times in China's history,
Right.
the Japanese invasion in the 1930s.
So this is where the whole dramatic book-saving story happens, right? I vaguely remember something about a librarian who, risked his life to protect a bunch of books during a war.
That's him. That's Dudingo.
Wow.
So picture China in the 1930s. Brutal invasions, cities are being bombed, universities are being taken over. And in all this chaos, Dudingo's biggest worry was the library he was in charge of.
Wow.
It had over 300,000 books representing centuries of Chinese history and thought.
It's incredible that while all this danger was happening, his main concern was saving those books. What made him go to such lengths?
Dudingo, he believed that these books were more than just objects. To him, they held the very soul of China.
Right.
He even wrote a letter to his library once calling it his beloved. And he was terrified of losing it. He saw the potential destruction of these books as a huge blow to Chinese culture, maybe even worse than losing territory or lives.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. So how did he actually manage to save so many books in the middle of a war?
It was a massive undertaking. Dudingo, he rallied his staff and they all packed up thousands of books.
Yeah.
They used whatever they could find. Blackboards, chair legs, anything to protect these precious volumes. They worked nonstop, racing against time as the fighting got closer and closer.
That must have been incredibly chaotic and scary. Did they manage to save everything?
They saved as much as they possibly could.
Right.
They moved a lot of the collection inland to safer places.
Okay.
But some books, they just couldn't take them.
Right.
Dudingo, he made the tough decision to seal up the books they couldn't take in the library's basement.
Mm-hmm.
He thought, people could escape, but the books, they were trapped.
It's such a powerful image, the books, stuck there, vulnerable, but with this hope that they might be found again someday. It really shows how important preserving knowledge was to Dudingo.
It does.
Yeah.
And, even though his efforts to save those books were heroic, his contributions to Chinese language reform go even deeper than that.
Right.
He realized that for China to really thrive in the modern world, they needed a way to organize their huge and complicated writing system.
Right. We were talking earlier about how Wang Zhao worked on simplifying the characters and making a phonetic system.
Yeah.
But even with all that, the number of characters was still a big problem. How do you organize a language with thousands of unique symbols, especially in a world that's becoming more and more reliant on technology that's designed for alphabets?
And that's exactly the problem that Dudingo was trying to solve. His solution was pretty brilliant, actually.
Okay.
He came up with a system to index Chinese characters based on the patterns of their strokes. Like if you were to break down words into their root letters, but for Chinese,
Okay.
this allowed for a kind of alphabetization, so you could organize characters in dictionaries and then eventually in computer databases.
So Dudingo basically created this bridge between the ancient world of Chinese characters and the new world of modern technology.
Yeah.
Like he was setting the stage for China's digital future.
Exactly. His work made it possible to use Chinese on typewriters, telegraphs, and later computers. Without a system like his, it would have been incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, to integrate Chinese with those technologies.
It's amazing to think about how these individuals, Wang Zhao simplifying the characters and Dudingo figuring out how to organize them, they were really setting the stage for a huge change in China's direction.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't end there,
Right.
does it? Now we have Mao Zedong and the Communist Revolution.
Yes. When the Communist Party came into power in 1949, it was a turning point for China.
Hmm.
including the story of its language.
Right.
Mao Zedong, a figure who's both praised and criticized, would take those language reform ideas and put them into action on a scale that had never been seen before.
So tell us, how did Mao and the communists handle the whole language situation, and what impact did their policies have on China's development?
So we've been talking about these amazing people like Wang Zhao and Du Dingo who put so much effort into reforming the Chinese language.
Yeah. But then we get to Mao Zedong and the communists, and it seems like they took language reform to a whole other level.
They did. Mao and the Communist Party, they really saw language as this crucial tool for unifying the country and, bringing it into the modern world. Remember, they came into power after decades of chaos and civil war. China really needed stability and a shared purpose.
And they believed that having a common language was the key to achieving that.
Exactly. They launched these huge literacy campaigns, sending educators out to even the most remote villages to teach people how to read and write. Their goal was to create a society where everyone could participate in politics and contribute to the country's development.
So they were building on what Wang Zhao and Du Dingo started, but taking it much further.
Right. And one of their most important decisions was to simplify Chinese characters even more. They figured that the simpler the characters, the easier they would be to learn and the faster literacy rates would go up.
That makes sense practically, but I imagine some people weren't happy about those changes.
Yeah.
I mean, Chinese characters have been around for centuries. They have so much history and cultural meaning attached to them.
Oh, absolutely. There were definitely debates about whether they were losing some of the cultural richness and artistic expression.
Right.
Some people felt that simplifying the characters was like, taking away layers of meaning and history.
It's kind of like the difference between looking at a really detailed painting and a simple sketch.
Right.
They both show the same thing, but the experience is totally different.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that debate is still going on today. Some people say the simplification process went too far, while others say it was necessary for China to modernize.
It reminds us that progress often comes with some sacrifices. But the communists didn't just stop at simplifying the characters. They also tackled the whole issue of romanization, didn't they?
Yes, they knew that in a world that was increasingly using technologies based on alphabets, China needed a way to connect with that.
Right.
And that's where Pinyin comes in.
Can you remind us what pinyin is and why it was so important?
Sure. Pinyin is a system for writing the sounds of Chinese using the Roman alphabet.
Okay.
It's what's used all over the world to teach Chinese today. Imagine trying to learn Chinese without an easy way to understand how to say those characters.
Yeah.
It would be super intimidating.
Right. Pinyin gives learners a place to start, a way to link the sounds of the language to those complicated characters.
Exactly. And it was crucial for incorporating Chinese into things like computers, telegraphs, typewriters, all those technologies that use alphabets.
So you could say that pinyin really opened the door for China to fully join the global technological revolution.
That's right. And the impact on China's development was enormous. Literacy rates shot up, communication got easier, and China was able to quickly adopt and adapt to new technologies.
It's amazing how these changes to language, which might seem kind of abstract, had such a big concrete impact on the real world.
It really shows how much power language has to shape a nation's destiny. And even though there are still discussions about the pros and cons of China's language reforms, there's no doubt that they were a major factor in its transformation.
So as we finish up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What should we be thinking about as we consider this amazing story?
I think the most important thing to remember is that language is more than just a way to communicate. It's a powerful tool that shapes our identity, brings people together, and drives progress. The choices we make about language, whether it's simplifying it, using romanization, or even just the words we use every day, have really big consequences.
That's a really good point. It reminds us to be aware of the power of language, to appreciate how complex it is, and to have thoughtful conversations about how it influences our world.
Exactly. And if this deep dive got you interested, we encourage you to learn more, to explore the fascinating world of languages and the stories they tell.
Thanks for joining us on this linguistic adventure. And remember, there's always more to discover. Subscribe for more deep dives into captivating topics.